Perhaps the biggest complaint about The Force Awakens by many people is that Rey is a Mary Sue. Now, if you've never heard that said of her before, which would surprise me, or if you're not entirely sure what it even means, I'll go over it briefly. Basically, a Mary Sue is a character who can seem to do no wrong. She somehow manages to get herself out of every tough situation with no real good explanation for how she even has the skills to do it. Usually, a Mary Sue is a younger, inexperienced character that comes from humble origins. Now, the purpose of this video is not to argue whether or not she's a Mary Sue. That is a whole other debate for another time. Personally, I believe there are some good explanations for the things she can do, which come mostly from the other sources of canon beyond the movies, but with that being said, this is one 19-year-old girl who is cool, calm, and can handle herself in any situation. Mary Sue or not, she certainly got her stuff together, if you know what I mean. Now, on the opposite side of the equation, we have Kylo Ren, or Ben Solo, a young man who certainly doesn't have his stuff together. He's conflicted, full of self-doubt, and has got one hell of a temper, just to name a few of his flaws. Now, let me just state this right away before I go on. I'm no expert or student of film. I certainly didn't go to school for it, and if you did and care to rip apart all the arguments I'm about to make, then go for it. I'm cool with that. I'd love to hear your ideas and theories about this. Now, personally, I've seen a lot of movies, as I'm sure you have too, and I can tell you that, from my experience, what I just described before goes against the norm. How so? Well, usually it's the villain who is the more perfect character, if you will, the one who can handle his business in any situation and has pretty much zero potential for growth, unless it's switching sides and seeing the error of their ways. While it's the hero who is the one who is unsure of himself or oftentimes has several personal or external issues they must overcome to, well, become the hero. Now, let's look within the Star Wars universe itself for examples of a traditional hero and villain. Darth Vader was the perfect villain and evil character. No one watching the original trilogy, especially before the prequels ever came out, had any doubts this was one bad dude who could handle any situation and that nobody ever messed with unless they absolutely had to. His only room for change or growth was to be redeemed by Luke and come back to the light, which of course he ultimately did. Now, on the flip side, let's look at Luke Skywalker and the journey he took in the 3 original movies. In A New Hope, he's this whiny kid who only cared about what he wants and needs, which were as simple as hanging with friends and buying power converters, or going off to the Imperial Academy instead of sticking around a whole nother season to help his uncle and aunt on their moisture farm. Then, with a little experience under his belt, he becomes this slightly hot-headed guy in The Empire Strikes Back who thinks, he knows a thing or two, but really needed to be humbled not only by this little green great warrior, as he thought Yoda would no doubt be, but by facing an opponent, Darth Vader, that he had no business even setting foot in the same arena with, much less the same ring. Then in Return of the Jedi, we see he's learned his lessons and is now someone who is unrecognizable from the character we first met in A New Hope. He is calm and confident, without being arrogant, enough so to go against the Emperor, perhaps the most powerful being in the galaxy, and attempt to rescue his father from the darkness that has consumed him for roughly 25 years. And the beauty of it, he pulls it off, saving his father's soul, if you will, and playing his part in defeating the Emperor and his empire, and helping bring peace and balance back to the galaxy. Or so we assumed back in 1983 when that was the end of Star Wars. Now, it's my personal belief that both Kylo Ren and Rey will be the main characters of this new trilogy, not just Rey as many believe. I also personally don't think Rey is going to be a Skywalker or a Solo, or any relation to Ben Solo at all for that matter. Now, moving on under those assumptions, how will our 2 main characters of this new trilogy grow and change going forward, knowing that they must in some respect, like happens in any good movie? In other words, what will their journeys look like, and where will they end up? Let's start with Rey, who again is already established as, well, pretty badass with no real major character flaws, like a villain usually is in many movies. Her only real goal in The Force Awakens is waiting for her family to come back. Yes, she wants to help BB-8 get back to the Resistance, but once that's done, it's back to Jakku to play the waiting game. Of course, with a little interference from Maz Kanata, she realizes her destiny is before her, not behind. Then she gets snatched up by Kylo Ren, inexplicably gets herself out of it, and then kicks Kylo Ren's ass at the end of the movie, which begs the question, where does she go from here? Well, we could see Luke begin her training, and she could continue to excel at an amazing rate, which would only reiterate the Mary Sue label many have already stamped on her, and maybe make this trilogy boring if we feel like nothing ever truly threatens her. Or of course, she could struggle with her training, which doesn't make much sense because of how naturally things had been coming to her in The Force Awakens. Another option is Luke could refuse to train her, keeping her in neutral for most of the movie until something happens that either changes his stance about training her, or her stance about wanting to be trained by him. Now, of those three, I'd personally find the third, Luke refusing to train her, to be the most likely and most intriguing. It also leaves open the possibility that Rey will eventually look elsewhere for training or acceptance if Luke isn't turning out to be the answer. Remember, the one thing from The Force Awakens that we know Rey still wants, the one thing she needs to overcome, if you will, is to be accepted, to find her place. So if Luke isn't the answer, who might be instead? Now, let's take a look at Kylo Ren or Ben Solo. If I'm right, and he's going to be the main character in this trilogy alongside Rey, he'll need to grow and change in his own respect, especially after his mostly embarrassing showing in The Force Awakens. Let's quickly recap what he did. First, he flat out murdered two older men, Lor San Tekka and Han Solo, could never get his hands on the droid or the map that would lead him to Luke Skywalker, the goal set forth by his master. He threw a huge temper tantrum twice and bickered with General Hux as if the two were young siblings. We see him talking about his doubts and insecurities when he's chatting to Vader's helmet, and admits later to his father that he's being torn apart, letting us know he's literally just a mess. He did capture the girl, but while interrogating her, pretty much got interrogated himself and had to run away and cry about it to his master. Then at the end, he did manage to defeat Finn, who we'd seen earlier had absolutely no skill whatsoever with a lightsaber, but then lost to Rey. And yes, in his defense, he was wounded during their duel and wasn't even trying to kill her, but rather recruit her as an apprentice. Nevertheless, all around not a great showing for our villain. Instead, he had a lot of the traits and failures of a hero who was just starting out in their journey. So how does Kylo Ren bounce back from all of that? How does he grow and change? Now, they may have him just overcome all his insecurities and flaws, show him training under Snoke and becoming more and more powerful, and a more and more worthy adversary for our heroes. And maybe he'll no longer feel torn in two, having dealt with that nagging light that wants him back because he's killed his father. And I suppose it is possible we'll see the villain's journey to becoming a bigger, badder, better villain or something. Still, I think we can safely assume that Luke will still try to bring him back to the light no matter what he's done. But will it even have any effect, or has he gone too far? What could bring him back to the light if not Luke, or perhaps Leia, his mother? Now, you can probably already see me hinting at Rey making a turn to the dark at some point in this trilogy, and Kylo making a turn back to the light. But would Disney and Lucasfilm really opt for this type of storyline? Aren't there some problems with it? Not the least of which being, isn't Rey going to be Disney's next beloved princess? Aren't kids going to leave episode 8 in tears if she goes evil? Well, maybe. And I'll admit that turning Rey, even for a time, would be a bold move on Disney's part, which may be why they do it. If they're going to keep Star Wars at the top, they're going to have to go against the grain from time to time, to do things we don't think they'll actually do. After all, did you really think that they'd have the guts to kill every main character off in Rogue One? And yet, they did it. I've got to believe that Disney not only knows what needs to be done to make Star Wars as great as it should be, but that they have the guts to do it. Now, more problems with this flipping of sides by our two main characters would be, hasn't Kylo Ren done the unforgivable? He's murdered perhaps the most beloved character in the history of Star Wars, Han Solo, and there's no coming back from that in the hearts and minds of some fans. I mean, didn't Lucasfilm and Disney do this on purpose to solidify Kylo as the ultimate evil character with no hope of redemption? Don't they want us to hate him? Well, I could point out that Anakin or Vader did far worse during his time, and he was still redeemed. Or I could suggest that there is something Kylo could do, a penance he could pay, that might allow fans to forgive him. What if, as I suggested earlier, Rey starts slipping towards the dark side because Luke either refuses to teach her, or she doesn't agree with his belief that there is still light in Kylo Ren? And eventually, as ironic as it may sound, it turns out that Kylo, or Ben, ultimately saves her from the dark side, which in turn is what saves him from it. I know, a tad confusing, but hopefully you're following me. What if during episode 8, we the audience, and maybe even Rey, begin to see just how right Han was when he told his son that Snoke is using him? What if Kylo has been manipulated and played like a puppet by Snoke his whole life because he's the grandson of Darth Vader? In the novelization of The Force Awakens, Leia even says that Snoke has been watching and influencing Ben from the shadows all along. Might knowing all this, and seeing what it's done to Ben, somehow change our hearts and minds about him? Might it also begin to change Rey's? So is this all crazy, or is it possible that Rey starting to fall to the dark is ultimately what brings Kylo back to the light? Might he even give his life for her, which is the penance I suggested earlier? I know I seem to be describing what could easily deteriorate into a sappy love story that belongs in a teen novel right on a shelf next to Twilight, but if done right, there is a lot of potential here. They don't even have to fall in love if I'm wrong about them being related. This could be the story of a brother and a sister trying to save each other, or of cousins trying to do the same. Who knows for sure, but I can't see this just being a simple story of Rey on the light versus Kylo on the dark, but rather perhaps one where these two meet somewhere in the middle and finally bring balance to the Force, which would make Luke the Last Jedi and explain the title of Episode 8. Especially when you consider they've already shown Kylo is conflicted and being pulled on by the light, and that, if many people are right, Rey tapped into the dark side to defeat Kylo Ren at the end of the movie. She even seems to stalk him when he's down, like a predator circling its prey before going in for the kill. I'll even ask you this, how does that fight end if a chasm doesn't open up between them? What does Rey do to this monster that just murdered the closest thing to a father she's ever had? Well, that's all I got for you this time. Let me know in the comments below what you think about all this, and let's talk some Star Wars. And please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this, and all things Star Wars to come. If you're already a subscriber, then thanks for your continued support. If you want to know when I put up new videos, then click the notification button or follow me on Twitter. And as always, thanks for watching.